Welcome to Streaming with Two Dudes, a podcast about all things streaming. Each episode, we break down some of the best series, songs, movies, and shows. I'm one dude, Parker.
I'm dude number two, Jeff.
And dudes, this episode, we're talking about The Black Phone, a 2022 film starring Mason Thames. I guess, is it Thames or Thames? Do you know? I'm not sure. Madeleine McGraw and Ethan Hawke, directed by Scott Derrickson and written by Scott Derrickson and C. Robert Cargill and Joe Hill, which was based on a short story by Joe Hill as well. We'll get into that in a little bit, but first, Jeff, what else have you been streaming?
Zero, zilch. I've been in vacation mode.
That's right.
Got away for a little while, which was nice. Went to the Tybee Island, Savannah, Georgia area. Perfect timing because the day we left was when Mr. Hurricane Ian was starting to impact Florida and was going to be impacting that area. So highly recommend visiting Savannah. I've been multiple times. One of my favorite cities on this planet. Go to savannah.com. Use Jeff as a just kidding. You won't get anything for using me as the code. so yeah. Anyway, I did stream Black Phone. So obviously we'll discuss that later. But otherwise, what about yourself, Mr. Streamer?
I actually just watched Hocus Pocus 2 last night, which I'm sure a lot of people did as well. It was okay. I mean, I'm glad I didn't get too pumped about it because I really wasn't let down. It was one of those situations where I didn't expect too much, so I didn't get let down. But I mean, for the story, I enjoyed the story, but I did think it was a little too silly for my liking. But you know, it's a Disney film, but it could have been a little bit darker, and I think they would have gotten away with it. But you know, it is what it is. It's there, but it was okay. If you like it, I'm not gonna hate you for liking it, but I mean, it's a kids movie, so what else can you say? They can't all be like perfect. But I like my horror movies. So I mean, what about you, man? What's your history with horror movies? Like, how have you always liked them? Is this like a new thing in your life? Like, were you like more an adult? Did you watch them as a kid? Did you sneak around? Were your parents into it? Or like, what's your history with horror films?
Well, first of all, as they would say in the South, it's fall, y'all. And Parker, even though you now knock on Canada's door, we all know you're still a true Southern, so you can relate. But,
yes.
But no, I mean, this time of year, man, it invokes so many good emotions and memories. One, I'm not a big fan of summertime. I love the fall. So it's like today we're officially in October. I mean, the weather's cooler. You break out the hoodies. And of course, I love Halloween. Love the whole horror genre. I do kind of, I think I've mentioned previously, kind of got a love-hate relationship with it. As a kid, absolutely loved it. You know, I'm a product of the 80s, so it was all about Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So, and even though like Jason and Freddy were probably the two more popular ones, I was actually a much bigger fan of Michael Myers and Halloween, and even the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So yeah, always a huge fan when I was younger, even in the teenage years. I guess as an adult, it kind of changed. I don't know if that's just where I changed, or I know the way they do horror movies changed a good bit. So maybe it was a combination of the two. But like once I got married, I didn't watch them near as much. It seems like when I did decide to watch one, I didn't care for it. There's only a handful I've watched probably in the last, I don't know, 20 years that I actually really enjoyed. However, I do think Black Phone was the perfect introduction for me personally, and we'll get much into that. We'll get more into that later. But so that's kind of my history with it. I'm actually hoping us watching all these films this month might rekindle or kind of spark what was my love when I was younger. We'll see how that plays out. So What about you? What's your history, your upbringing with this genre?
I have been in love with horror films ever since I can remember. I mean, I was a product of the late 80s and early 90s. So a lot of my cartoons and programming were pretty dark. I grew up with mothers dying and all of that stuff. So all of that kind of stuff was the morbid fascination with all of that stuff was already there. And then I think I watched the third Child's Play when I was around 5. I saw scenes in it, and the thought of a killer doll was just like crazy. It was both terrifying and super interesting to me. And so eventually I just begged my parents until they finally let me watch it. And from there, it just took off. My mom was a big fan of horror, so she was letting me watch Pet Cemetery, all of these things, and I was allowed to take it. I could take it. It didn't really freak me out. I was not super, like into them as a kid, but like I always loved a good horror film. They weren't like my main thing by any stretch of the imagination because I just loved all movies when I was a kid, but horror was huge. And like you said, the set, like, I think it's just pretty much everywhere in America, but because man, the decorations here, are outstanding. I love it here. The fall, the leaves changing, the trees are beautiful. But yeah, I love Halloween, the fall. It's great. Hoodie time, perfect. But yeah, my and from there, I've always been into horror films. I always, try to keep up to the new ones. Some of the ones, like they get a little more gory. I wasn't really into. I really like the Saw, franchise, but outside of that, I really wasn't a fan of like Hostel or anything. But pretty much anything that's horror, whether it be like supernatural, the serial killers, the masked horror, the stalker thing, love all of it. It all is anything freaky is just great. Zombies, aliens, whatever. Love it. So I'm all things like freaky and morbid. Give it to me, especially this time of year. Like I eat it up like candy, like king size candy.
So would you say that the Child's Play movie was maybe the first one you remember that really piqued your interest? Or
That one was definitely for sure my introduction. And I would say I actually fell in love with, like, I mean, like that one was yeah, for sure my introduction. And the one that got me like into being scared and like finding it amusing being scared. But, you know, from there it was like, Ghostbusters, even things like that, like those were marketed as like movies for children. So yeah, I grew up with like all things like that, like paranormal. It's just literally been a part of my life forever and ever, and I hope it always will be. I mean, I grew up with Tim Burton movies. Like, what else do you expect?
yeah.
Like, like even our some of our romance were basically like set with some kind of like horror element to them. So I mean, this is I'm the product of that,
Yeah,
but it's great.
I think for me, or at least the one I remember first was probably the original Halloween movie.
Hmm.
Man, it just I fell in love with it, and just and you might be like me that I was never the type where like scary movies like gave me bad dreams. Or I mean, I was able to separate, I guess, reality from being in a different realm of a movie.
Right.
And I love the scare side of it. The I don't know, just the intensity. I don't know, just like, but yeah, Halloween, and then Halloween 2, man, that's what did it for me. And again, I know Freddie and Jason were probably more popular in the 80s, but
Hmm.
man, there's just something about Michael Myers and the Halloween franchise that just always did it for me, except for Halloween 3.
Yeah.
That I don't know. I don't even want to talk about it. I'm still bitter about that one.
I think a lot of people are because I mean they expected something totally different, and which I mean we can get into later on, but that that was actually originally the plan for the Halloween movies was going to be like an anthology. It wasn't going to be focused on Michael Myers. He just became so popular that that's where they decided to go with it. And so the season of the witch was more of like what they were actually planning to do with the original sequel. But that Michael Myers was so popular that they brought him back for a sequel, and then they decided to go with the anthology from there. And then everybody had such a backlash around it that they
Yeah.
reverted back to like, I guess Halloween's about Michael Myers now. So
Exactly.
they stuck with what worked. So I mean, I don't blame them, but it does work with some other times. Like it definitely works with like American Horror Story, which I love. That's always great. Which I mean, not every season is great, but overall, man, such a great show. That could have be like another thing that like that's always streaming. That's great. But let's get into what we've been watching this week. We're gonna do a little bit different setup. We're not gonna do our points. We're gonna go over a basic outline and tell you about the movie we've been watching. We start out, at a baseball game. The setting is North Denver, 1978. We meet Finney, who is a pitcher. And then we see Bruce, who hits a home run off of him. Then Bruce gets kidnapped on his way home by the grabber. And then cue the Freaky Bloomhouse opening credits, which reminded me a lot of a Nine Inch Nail video. Did you ever watch MTV with the Nine Inch Nail videos? Do you ever remember those?
Not specifically. Now, I mean, of course, I definitely grew up watching a good bit of MTV, but not that one in particular.
Where it just has like those real industrial, like, I mean, their music's real industrial, but then they also have like these scenes of just like really off-put like black and white things cut to like the music, and it's just like real glitchy like that. It's just whenever they have those things always remind me of Nine Inch Nails videos. I'm sure there's people out there that can relate to that. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. But whenever whenever I see like credit intros that do that, or even at the end of films when it does that, like like that David Lynchy kind of vibe, it always reminds me of like Nine Inch Nails videos every time. And I know sometimes that Trent Reznor is involved with those, so that kind of makes sense. But I don't think he was involved with this. I think it's just kind of like that vibe that kind of gets put into movies now. Maybe that's just an influence there. I don't know. So then we cut to Finney's home after the credits. We see that Finney's dad is a drunk. He's hungover at the breakfast table. The kids are being too loud. Finney's slurping too loud. Gwen is slamming the bread box. They see a fight before school. We are introduced to a character named Robin who beat a bigger kid up named Moose. We find out that Robin and Finney are friends, and Robbie is kind of a protector type for Finney. He saves him from getting beat up in the bathroom. Finney's sister Gwen gets visions in her dreams. Detectives bring her to the office at school and question her about some of her dreams, and find out that she has information that is accurate that nobody else had. So, the detectives give her dreams, some credible witness testimony there.
And how feisty is Gwen?
I love Gwen. Gwen, okay, I'll talk about this right here. Like Ethan Hawke did a great job as the grabber, but the best performance in the entire movie was that little girl, that Madeleine. What was it? I have to look at her name again. Madeleine McGraw. Best performance in the movie by far. Like Mason did a great job. The little boy that played Finney, he did good as well. I mean, I would put him as number 2, but she did great. And in the next scene where she's getting, it's so brutal, but she's getting, beat by her dad. That acting in that scene, man, like it's like I was never, I got spanked, but I was never, anything like that. Like my father never wailed on me or anything like that, and never laid his hands on me intoxicated or anything. I just got, the pop on the butt and keep moving usually, So never got it like that, but I did have, friends that unfortunately did. And man, like if that girl has not ever had her hands laid on her like that, like she must has seen some stuff because it was so believable. Just the way the inflection in her voice and everything. And
Yeah, I mean,
man,
that's with this being a horror flick, to me, that was by far the most terrifying scene
absolutely. Absolutely.
was her dad beating her. And like you
Mhm.
said, for her to be so young, and I'm sure you picked up on it when her dad's screaming at her to tell her to keep repeating, my dreams are just dreams, they're not real.
Yeah.
It's like her emotion kept changing
Yeah.
to where she's visibly upset. She's starting to get angry. And she's representing all the emotions that she's going through.
Yeah.
And yeah, but yeah, I totally agree. Her and we've watched a number of things here lately where just the child acting is just on a totally different level. When I was younger, I don't recall seeing a ton of movies or shows in which the child acting was at this kind of level. I mean, I grew up on like Saved by the Bell,
Mhm.
where that
Right. And
type
I
of
mean,
stuff where the acting was atrocious. But yeah, man, I'm sitting here thinking the world better hope Gwen doesn't join Cobra Kai because if she does, it's over.
right.
It's the end.
I mean,
Uh,
yeah, like growing
so,
up, it seemed like we would always have like one or maybe two good kids at a time, like maybe for your age, like Jodie Foster was a big deal, like it was always like one or two at a time. But now it just seems like here in the past 10 or 15 years that they just stepped up their game. And like hopefully you can see like maybe with the way things have changed, just society's changed, maybe these kids can last because not even just in the things that we've watched and discussed on here, but so many different things I've seen, like child actors and actresses that act circles around some of the adults that I've seen in my life. It's just ridiculous. But yeah, she was by far the best part of the show. So yeah, her dad, beats her over, the cops visiting him at work over the dreams, which, was a brutal scene. And then after that, we see Robin get kidnapped now without anybody to protect him. The bullies chase down Finney, but Gwen comes to help by bashing Kid's head in with a rock. And then, then she, turns around and gets her ass kicked afterwards. But man, that, like you said, dude, like I can't imagine if she got into like Cobra Kai, how dirty she could get. Like, woof, man, just that rock upside, like that shocked me. That I was when I watched it the first time, I audibly gasped. I was like, just she whacked him good, and then he's just sitting there, and he's just the blood coming out of his head. And she just sits beside him, and they just look at each other. Like that was just so surreal. And I'm just like, man, it reminds you of like those scenes that you see. Like, even like, I don't know if you ever had anything like that happen where like kids get hit or anything, like an accident happens, like in the schoolyard or something like that. Like, where it's just like you're just there with it for a second and you just kind of like, yep, this is this is going on. And it's just there. Like, I don't know. It's such a weird thing for uh that scene was really weird for me.
yeah, we all could use a Gwen in our corner in this
Dude,
crazy world. And
dude,
I,
she's
I,
great.
I love her and Finn's bond and relationship, which obviously I think is strengthened by the fact that their dad is so abusive.
Yeah.
It kind of forces them to have to rely even more on each other. But the way she supports him and backs him up, just the bond they have, it was for a dark movie. That was one of the bright spots that kind of shined.
Yeah. And I could never tell. Could you tell who was older and who was younger?
I thought Finney was older.
I assume so as well, but
I'm thinking Finney. I maybe like 12, 13. Maybe Gwen's just maybe a couple of years younger.
Yeah. But there was, I mean, she definitely, acted more, I guess more assertive. I wouldn't say mature because they were both seemed pretty mature. But as far as like, like being assertive, she definitely had the upper hand. But in some scenes, it also seemed like she was a little bit bigger as well. But like you said, it could be the total opposite. And I just couldn't never tell. So I was completely unclear. I never took it really one way or the other. I mean, it would make more sense for her to be younger and I guess play that part. But yeah, then, after that, on the way home from getting beat up, Finney gets kidnapped by the grabber, which not so much in the rest of the movie, but in that scene right there, he totally reminded me of the Joker from The
Mm.
Dark Knight. Like when Heath Ledger's Joker, man, did he not like the laughs that he was doing and just kind of the voice inflictions? I guess total Joker vibes. What do you think about the mask?
I mean, it's interesting that because that was actually one of the things. I guess one of the questions I had was just what is up with the mask. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes he's just covering his mouth part.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes it's a full mask. Is there a meaning or purpose behind which mask he wears at which time?
I didn't do like too much, but I mean, I just kind of did like some surface level reading and investigating on the same thing because I had the same question. Because I don't know if you even noticed this, but even the mouthpiece would change sometimes.
Hmm.
Like it would be, smiling. We saw it smiling at first, and then we saw it, I think it was frowning next, and then it was just blank. And then, like you said, it wasn't even wearing it. So, yeah, there's definitely some kind of significance. And I don't know if it was like a mood that he was in or like a way to portray his emotions. And then at the end, when he just was showing his mouth, like that was like his murder mode, like which is like, like exposing like I guess the real part of him. I don't know, but yeah, the mask was a blend of creepy and interesting. And I know that the person who created it did, spend a lot of time working on it. So I mean, they did a great job with it because man, it was definitely one of those masks that just kind of sticks with you. You know what I mean? Like it sticks in your mind. Kind of, it's like one of those faces that will always kind of haunt you, kind of like a Michael Myers.
Yeah.
That's just kind of like that haunting, ghastly kind of thing. Like I can name off like probably five faces off the top of my head that remind me of like the thing, like the puppets from the Puppet Master, Frank from Donnie Darko. Like all of these, like it just all of these like things it kind of just reminds me of that just kind of like just stick in a mental place in your head that is just kind of like you don't want to see them in a dark room, in the shadows. Like
Yeah.
for sure, like it would definitely be a lot, even like a lot scarier than even say like a Chucky, like yeah, it would be scary to see Chucky, but it would be way scarier to see that Michael Myers shadow, like outline in the shadows, like
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, and you had just mentioned the scene where Finney is kidnapped, and
Hmm.
and I know most movies there's certain things you just have to let go, just because it may not be as believable. But I'm sitting here thinking, I mean, my gosh, how common was a black van
Right.
in the 70s? I
Yeah.
mean, and he parks in front of his house or, in his driveway and he kidnaps all these kids or boys in broad daylight. Of like, so that was just one of the areas where I just had to tell myself, just kind of let it go and just enjoy the ride.
Yeah, and then I remember it was set in the late 70s when kidnappings and all of that were like at an all-time high. So I'm also like, yeah, I can also kind of believe it as well. Like, even though I wasn't alive during that time by, like a decade, I at least have seen enough true crime things to know that, man, the 60s and 70s and 80s were just like it was like the Wild West for serial killers, for kidnappers, for all of the above. Like, yeah, because they DNA and stuff like that hadn't been invented. They were smarter than the police. It was just, yeah. Anyways,
So Finney was his last. I guess, victim as far as
Yeah.
being kidnapped. Do you think were any of his victims handpicked, or were they just simply random and based on opportunity?
I think they were just based on opportunity because I mean he doesn't even know their names. I mean he says he doesn't know their names. I think he just is looking for more of a type. You know, he just looks for a boy by himself and grabs them when he finds the opportunity. Yeah, I don't think he knows anything about the kids. I think we would have maybe seen some of him or like because I kind of looked for that in the second one or the second time I watched it and I might have missed something, but I kind of looked in the background before Finney gets kidnapped to see if like you could see him stalking, and I looked for like even Ethan Hawke in the background, and I never saw it. So I'm just assuming that it's just random because especially in the scene with Bruce, I was like, maybe they cut to him at the baseball game and like he sees both of them, you know, and that's
Mm.
where we get the connection. And like as he's stalking Finney, he sees Robin as well, and you know, I was like, maybe that's where it all connects and stuff. But no, I don't think I don't think he picked any of them. I think it was just an opportunity and just a coincidence that they were all kind of connected, especially the last two victims were kind of connected to Finney. I think that was just coincidence. And so then the grabber puts him in a concrete basement with a bathroom, a bed, and a black phone that rings but seemingly isn't connected to anything. Meanwhile, Gwen gets a call from her dad while she's at a friend's house and she races home, basically assuming that the worst, that her brother has been kidnapped. And back in the basement, Finney keeps hearing the phone. At first, no one is there, but then the other boys who had been previously kidnapped by the grabber start to give him advice on how to survive and escape. Meanwhile, Sister Gwen proceeds to have dreams about the victims in more detail. Police are canvassing the area and are invited in by Max, who we find out is the grabber's brother, who is really into the case and really into cocaine. And then I made a note here: sound of food slopping on plate equals gross. Oh, that's I remember what that is. That's the scene where Finney's picking up the food off that was on the
Yeah.
floor and putting it back on the plate. Okay, that's what that was. Finney hasn't been killed because he hasn't been playing naughty boy. Finn almost escapes, but gets caught. Little Gwen questions her faith over her lack of dreams. Then she has a dream that overlaps Finney's latest phone call with Vance, who gives him even more information. Robin calls with the last bit of info on how to defeat the grabber. Meanwhile, Max figures out his brother is the grabber and checks the basement and gets killed. Finney uses all the tools and information given by the victims to defeat the grabber and escape the basement, which is the house across the street from the burial house. The end. So, what'd you think about it, man?
I mentioned earlier, I thought this movie was a great introduction for this month that we're focusing on the horror genre. As I said earlier, I've kind of had a love hate relationship. I've been curious to start this to see, what would happen as I started to watch these kind of movies again. And man, I'm a big fan of this one. I thought it used a lot of the elements of your traditional horror flick and then kind of brought in some of the newer stuff. And I thought it mended really well. And I'm always type of person, and you may be the same, where I love watching movies, but the other side of it that I love is I'm always pulling out deeper themes or life lessons out of it. And I thought this movie, whether I'm sure some of it was intentional, but I felt like there was a lot of cool themes in there as
Yeah.
far as life type situations.
Yeah. It was really great. I mean, you know, I was definitely expecting a more horror film, I guess. And this, I guess you could classify this probably a little bit more on the thriller side of things. But
Yeah,
man, it was great. The way the writing was, it was super well written. I don't know if you know this, but Joe Hill, the guy who wrote the short story that this is based on, is actually Stephen King's son.
Okay, yeah,
So
I do remember reading that.
yeah, Jeff, I know we talked a little bit about like some of the things that we've noticed about the movie as we were watching it, but did you have any extra trivia or information about the movie that we haven't covered already?
Probably not trivia per se, but there are different parts of the movie that I think are interesting for discussion. One of Gwen's earlier dreams, she sees Finney kind of at, I guess, at inside a house, but looking out the door, kind of banging on it.
Yeah.
Was that supposed to represent their house, or I noticed the house number was 1242,
Yeah.
and I was trying to research to figure out, what house was that, because it wasn't the grabber's house, at least not the one that she sees in her other dreams.
Yeah, because that was like 740 or 77441 or something like
Yeah,
that.
7741.
Yeah.
So I didn't know if it was supposed to represent the other house he used cross street, or maybe, and I didn't go back to look at the front of their house to see maybe if it was just their house, but
Yeah.
I did pause it to see that the house number was 1242. So I'm like, is that important? Was that supposed to represent something?
Huh. I'm guessing it probably, I mean, it must have been their house. Because, I mean, just based on how house numbering works, it wouldn't be the grabber's house as well.
Yeah.
Because that would be like 7742 or something.
Yeah, because
Uh,
it's usually even numbers on one
yeah.
side and odd on the other. So
Yeah. So,
so maybe that was just their house. I don't know. But what did you think about all of the different information and tips he was given by the previous victims?
I think him and his sister both have the same, I guess, gift that their mother had. I didn't really cover that, but like their mother, we found out that the mother had dreams and stuff, and that eventually led her to kill herself. And that's one of the reasons that their father is so against her dreams. But I just don't think that, I think that whatever they have as far as gift wise, I think the grabber had it. And I think that was one of the things that conflicted the grabber so much, because when he was down there, which was another really creepy scene, when he's down there with Finney, and Finney wakes up and he tells the phone to, stop it or whatever. And then he's like, stop, stop what? I think he realizes that Finney can hear the phone ringing. And I think there's, as far as the grabber, which I mean, we don't really learn about his backstory. So it's literally just left up to interpretation. But I think that maybe that was like part of his punishment when he was a kid, was being locked in that basement, and he could hear the phone ring, but never, it just he just thought that he was crazy. And that's what his father convinced him of, just like their father was doing, with Gwen. So I think that was one of the things that he was conflicted with, was seeing that, that's why he said he was different. I don't think, because we found out that the other boys couldn't hear the phone, because through, the ghost, he said, why did none of the other boys ever answer the phone? He said they couldn't hear it. The phone rang, but they couldn't hear it, but he
Yeah,
could.
I think it was, yeah, Bruce told him that none of us heard it. He says the grabber hears it, but he
Hmm.
doesn't want to believe it.
Right.
So and sometimes I'm guilty of trying too hard to read into stuff, because I always want to try to catch every little hidden message maybe that the showrunners are trying to sneak in. But part of me wondered if the black phone was like a metaphor for the grabber, maybe the guilt he had for his crimes and his sins,
Hmm.
and so he could hear it, but he didn't want to hear from those victims.
Yeah.
So it kind of represented, and the fact that he went across the street to bury their bodies.
Yeah.
So he didn't even do it in the same location that he did the torture. So, I think the black phone is kind of a metaphor representing more than just a means of the past victims communicating to Finn.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a lot there to unpack. I mean, it was just it's super dense, and like I got to thinking about the Stephen King connection, and I wonder if maybe they all have The Shining, you know, they can
Yeah.
all because I mean we find out like I kind of touched on it, but it's not just like they're having premonitions. We found out that the communications are 100% accurate because they overlap. Finney can't hear Gwen, but Gwen in her dream with the Vance character, she can hear Finn. She can hear the communication between Finn and Vance.
Yeah.
So she felt like that's 100%. I don't. That was really interesting to me how uh, that was pointed out that she can hear that communication. Like just like I don't know. It was very shining-ish to me. So I don't know. That's just and then the fact that it's written by Stephen King's son is just too much of a coincidence. But it could just be, inspiration. But I man, this movie was great. I loved it.
So
Loved it.
you mentioned The Shining. I kind of got a vibe off of another movie, not a Stephen King, but a fairly well-known guy by M. Night Shyamalan. The movie Signs,
Okay.
and and you're probably thinking, okay, whatever, but I'll piece it together for you. We find that Finney is given all this information from the previous victims, and he fails to understand what the purpose or the benefit of knowing it ends up being, because I think it was Bruce that tells him about the cable that's hidden under the wall. So he uses that to try to, get to the window, and it just ends up pulling the grate down. And then I believe it was Vance that told him about the place in the wall, near the toilet.
Mhm.
He gets through it. He can't bust through the freezer. So I mean, he just all these little things, and he just feels like he's being defeated every single time. Even the combo to the lock, that didn't work. I'm trying to think some of the other ones, but it wasn't until the end, till all those things together kind of
Mhm.
piece together to ultimately defeat the grabber at the end. And the reason that made me think of Signs was all these little things throughout the movie that didn't make much sense, like the little girl leaving glasses of water everywhere.
Mhm.
Um, Mel Gibson, I forget his character's name, but his brother being a baseball player, but it never panned out to the future he thought.
Yeah.
The little girl having, asthma. All those little things didn't seem to have a purpose, but they all played together at the very end,
Yeah.
and then you saw the purpose.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's why the ending made me think of Signs is, and to me that was where the big life lesson kind of hit, was sometimes we encounter these little things that we feel like it's just defeat, and we didn't understand the purpose of it. And I thought it was interesting that at Finn's lowest moment is when Robin calls.
Yeah.
Probably his only, what we are led to believe is his only friend at all. And that was the very moment. It was right after he bust through the wall and couldn't get through the freezer, and he's crying. He's just hopeless. He's in total despair. And that was the very moment that Robin called and kind of gave him a pep talk, and gave him that last tip as far as filling the dirt with receiver, and just kind of gave him that encouragement that he needed,
Yeah.
and basically the confidence. I mean, that was the movie was all about Finn's confidence,
Yeah.
just like I felt like the movie Signs was all about Mel Gibson's character's faith, that he lost, and then it was rekindled at the end when he saw all those little pieces kind of come
Mhm.
together. And we kind of saw the same thing with Finn when all those little, I mean, the cable and the grate, the grate was used in that hole to, basically break his ankle.
Yeah.
And the cable was used to trip him. And then the phone cord, obviously he used the choke him, and of course he used all the tips from Robin to just beat the mud out of him.
Yeah.
Uh, and then even the freezer, he used the meat that he got out of the freezer to
Distract the dog.
distract the dog so he could get out. So
Mhm.
all those little things that we thought were just failed attempts. The only one I don't think he actually used to defeat the grabber was I think it was Griffin that gave him the information as far as the lock and the combination.
Yeah.
I don't think he used anything from Griffin
But
to
he used
actually.
that to leave. He used that to
Yeah,
leave at the very end.
I but I guess I was looking more at. I mean, he probably would have got out of the house either way, but so it still played a part and it was still important. But as far as all the maneuvers he made, to actually defeat Grabber, he used something from all of them, probably except for Griffin. But like you said, that was the way he was able to get out, which still important because the police weren't honed in on that particular house.
Yeah.
So it is important that he's able to get out. But
It reminded me of like in like when these little types of scenarios happen in movies, it always reminds me of these little point and click games that I used to play whenever we were kids in school, like Freddy Fish. And it was like these things where you would go to like these different scenes and you would have to like collect things randomly on the screen and like you would add them to your inventory and then eventually they would come into play later on in the game, like where you would like piece together and it would be like, oh, that's the reason that I collected that shell was that so that it could be put onto this, weight so that it would lift the door,
yeah.
and like it was just reminds me of like those little point and click games, just a really dark version of those from whenever I was a kid.
Oh yeah, and a lot of life lessons in there.
Mm-hmm.
One interesting tidbit on my second time watching it, there towards the end when the police go to the house that Gwen leads them to, at that point the grabber's already in the basement with Finn on across the street.
Yeah.
I noticed when the police showed up and you see the house across the street in the background,
Mm-hmm.
the black van's not there. And I'm like, well, that's weird because the grabber's already at the house at this time.
Yeah.
But when Finn comes out of the house, the black van is there.
I didn't catch
But
that.
I'm guessing that was just an oversight by the
Yeah.
producers because it's not there the first time, but when he comes walking out, it's there. And because at first I was like, well, maybe he just parked behind the house or whatever, but no, he parked right there in the driveway. It just
Hmm.
didn't show it up at first.
I wonder, yeah, or maybe, yeah, is either a goof or they just purposefully left it out so that you wouldn't be, because they wanted to trick you, like they didn't want you to catch the black van in the background and then
Yeah.
not be tricked because I mean, I don't know about you, but for a split second when I saw that the house was empty and the bodies were buried in the basement, I was like, is Finney already dead? And like he's like left and all that. And then they showed the hole where it was still empty. And I was like, oh thank God, like he's not, because I was thinking like maybe his sister's hearing all this and like finding all this out in like a dream or something. And like
Yeah.
she's communicating, like like she's finding all this out, like last little bit of information that we find out from her dream. And so I'm really glad that didn't work out. But yeah, I did not catch that van. That's crazy.
Yeah. And so like you mentioned earlier, we're not given a lot of backstory on the grabber. The producers obviously left a lot, like you said, left a lot to interpretation. Based on things he mentions, we assume that he grew up in that house because makes comment that phone hasn't worked since I was a kid.
Yeah.
So I guess my interpretation was good chance that he may have been abused by his dad,
Yeah.
which is ironic based on Finney and his sister
Mhm.
kind of being in that same situation. And like you mentioned a good point as far as their mom, having a certain kind of power or connection with dreams, and maybe the grabber does as well. So, I'm thinking that the grabber has probably had a similar experience as a child, and that obviously had an impact on him. I also wonder what the impact is on Finney. We don't get an indication that, and I know it's left up to interpretation, but I almost kind of get the idea that maybe Gwen is abused a lot more than he is
Yeah.
because of her dreams. And just the similarity there with her mom and obviously her dad's ex-wife. But
I would say that a
um,
lot of it probably has to do with the fact that she stands up to him a lot as well, because it just comes with her personality.
yeah, but you might makes you wonder what impact that has on Finney by not being able to stop it or do anything about it.
Yeah.
You kind of, and that's kind of where we see that lack of confidence play out as far as kind of what he struggles with. And we kind of see there at the end where his confidence is like restored.
He's overcame that. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of marches into the school. You know, he's got a different little pep to his step, a different kind of strut, and
Yeah, he's basically overcame his demons.
yeah,
Literally.
yeah. And then he talks to that girl,
Mhm.
and I thought it was interesting there at the end. He says, "Call me Finn."
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, I think Robin was kind of the only one that called him Finn.
Yeah.
I think everybody else pretty much called him Finney. So just the respect and connection he had with Robin, which Robin represents confidence to the extreme.
Yeah.
So it's almost like he now can take that on, and he's like, I'm a different person now.
Yeah.
So Park, you kind of hinted earlier that this wasn't necessarily like a super scary movie, and it wasn't. It definitely played more as a thriller. But was there a particular scene that you would say kind of spooked you or kind of had you on the edge the most?
I mean, really, I can only even think of one jump scare was the dripping, the part where the we found the boy, hovering, up like laying like with his back arched and blood dripping. When it cuts to him, and that's not even really a jump scare. As far as disturbing, it has to be that scene that was literally real life. It's not even illegal to have, like that's a legal thing that can happen and happens every day. That one's probably the most disturbing. I don't think there was anything that really, I mean, all of the scenes with the grabber were very off-putting for sure. The mask was totally creepy. Ethan Hawke's performance was great. Just a super creepy dude. So I mean, all of that was super creepy just in general. But as far as like the scene that stuck with me as far as disturbed me or bothered me the most is definitely the father beating Gwen.
Yeah. So the one that probably had me on edge the most, it was kind of like where you're just prepping yourself to jump because you know something's about to happen, was when he was given the combination to the lock,
Oh yeah.
and the ghost even told him, hey, he's sleeping right now.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And Finn goes up the stairs and has to walk right past him. And, the grabber's kind of coming to a little bit. You can tell he's not like fully asleep. And then, of course, he walks. I just knew he was going to jump up and grab that kid.
Oh.
And that one was, to me, probably the most intense as far as, being on the edge of my seat. And I'm just like, oh, I know something's about to happen. I got to prep myself for it.
Did you think he was going to get away?
Actually, I didn't. Not at that particular scene. I thought there was still too much left that had to happen.
Yeah.
I'll get into that scene a little bit more later on. But no, I didn't think he was going to make it out the door at that particular time.
Well, go ahead and talk about it.
Well, this was, I guess we can it was going to be part of my dude or dud.
Okay. Well, we can go ahead and we can actually go ahead and do that. We'll go ahead. Yeah. What is your dude or dud of the week? We can jump into that right now.
This may be a little controversial.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm picking a dud of the week.
Oh, this is your first dud of the week, isn't it?
Is it?
I think it is.
All right.
It might be.
It's going to be an unpopular opinion, but my dud of the week is Finney.
Oh, why? How's this?
Man,
you tell.
You unlock the lock, you get out of the house, you get a good running start. The dude's in a vehicle. You're in a neighborhood. You have to stick to the sidewalk.
Right. Yeah. He couldn't cut through some backyards.
Exactly. We see this play out in so many movies. It just frustrates me to no end.
At least he wasn't running in the middle of the street. I'll give him that.
Yeah.
I see that a lot too. But
there's no reason why he should have been caught in that situation. I mean, unless the grabber kind of just pulled over and just is faster and outran him.
Mm-hmm.
But the grabber's not in the best of shape, and Finney's a young kid. I don't
know, man. He looked pretty swole sitting in that chair half naked.
But I still think Finney should be able to outrun him. But the fact that he stayed on the sidewalk and basically just ran right into the van, I'm like, dude, at that point, I'm like, you almost deserve to die at that point. I mean, That was
Well,
your
I mean, I think that was what we saw from Finney's character. He hadn't made it to that point. Like that was part of his character's growth. I mean, like it.
but he's not stupid.
Right. He's not. You're right. He's not stupid, but it's like he still didn't have that fight for life. You know, like he didn't. He wanted to live, but he didn't have that fight in him. Like he's always had the I guess the fight, but he didn't fight back. You know, like he never ran from the fight. He wasn't scared of the fight. He's not scared to do these things. He's a brave kid. He just doesn't. He's afraid to fight back, and that's the problem. Is he doesn't have the confidence to fight back, and so that's the whole thing. Is he realizes that he has to fight back in order to escape. Like that's the whole lesson that Finn learns the whole movie, and that's why he's able to overcome because he never fights. He's just running, and so I mean, yeah, of course he doesn't get away from with running because he wouldn't have learned his lesson. He didn't fight, and that was the whole point. Was he actually has a fight to overcome, and then yeah, then
Yeah, and I totally get all that, and I do understand
but yeah,
the purpose behind it because,
he could have gotten caught a little bit harder. He could have been
yeah,
made it a little
because
bit harder to get away.
like I said, if he gets away in that situation, then does he get his confidence back? Or not only that, is the grabber ever defeated?
Right.
If he gets, I guess my thing was just the way he got caught. I'm like, dude, come on, just
Mm-hmm.
cut behind the house. He's in a vehicle. You're on foot. You kind of have an advantage.
But yeah, at least, even mice know to like scurry under the nearest object.
But so yeah, that I'm sorry that just kind of did it for me. That made him my dud of the week. But his acting was brilliant, so I'll give him that.
Yeah. My
So, who's your dude or dud of the week?
my dude of the week is going to be Robin, just because we didn't really get to talk about him too much. I mean, obviously there was a bunch of great characters and great actors in this, but that little dude was a great friend. He was the strongest kid in the school, and he still stood up for the little guy. I don't know. I always like characters like that. They're always really fun. So his advice, he definitely was there and helped his friend. Basically told him like, "You're not dying. You're not coming with me. You're not going to be where I am. You're better than this. You have it in you," and basically pushes him over the finish line. So my dude of the week is Robin.
Solid choice.
Yes, yes. All right, we'll go into our ranking. This is another new thing here. We are going to give it a ranking out of 5, 0 being the lowest, 5 being the highest. We're going to rank this one out of, we'll say, thought out stakes. Out of 5 thought out stakes, how many thought out stakes could you give this movie?
I'm gonna give it a solid 4.
All right, 4 thought out stakes. Nice.
Solid 4.
Yeah, what you want to say why? What gave it a 4?
I'm very hesitant to give any movie a 5.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the way I operate. To me, that means it couldn't have been any better. There's no room for improvement. So I'm stingy with my 5s. 4.5 is a possibility. And it could be once I watch a lot more movies, I go back and I might think, you know what, that was probably an actual 4.5. But for now, I'm gonna give it a solid 4. Great movie. Acting was superb. Just from start to finish, it was just very well done. I love the whole 70s vibe. To me, that just kind of made it even more eerie.
Yeah.
Just again, we talked about it earlier. The child acting just on another level. But yeah, all in all, I highly recommend it, and I give it a solid 4. What about
Yeah.
you? Ball stakes.
I will actually give it the same 4 thought out stakes for pretty much the same reasons. Was it absolutely perfect? No, it was not. There was, some things that, could have been improved on, but overall, I mean, this is about as good as they come, like you don't get much better than this. It wasn't very scary, which, it doesn't have to be. They definitely didn't it definitely didn't affect my ranking whatsoever. But I expected it to be a little scarier, but it was a great film. So I wasn't let down by it by any stretch of the imagination. And like you said, the acting was great. The performances were all good. I can't even think of one that even stood out to me as being like, okay, this guy's acting in a different film or anything like that. Everything was well acted. Everything was well written. Everything pretty much made sense with the exception of, running on the sidewalk and, maybe a few other things. But yeah, it was kept you interested. It's like an hour and like 40 minutes, but you don't really lose interest in it, at any point. I never, have to. I think there was one point where I bumped my phone because I was actually watching this on my phone, and I bumped my phone and realized that it was like an hour and 5 minutes in, and I was like, "What? I've already watched an hour and 5 minutes of this movie." I was like, I feel like there's so much more that could happen. So, like, it moves really well. It paces, great. I don't think there's anything that's just like unneeded. Maybe the only thing that maybe could have been left out was his little, B plot with the girl. But I guess that's kind of served his purpose as far as, showing his confidence. But other than that, great movie. I would highly recommend it to anybody that likes any kind of, thrillers or horrors, because this would be a great one to recommend to just about anybody, because like you said, it's not too scary. So it's not going to really like bother too many people. And, the language is a little bit, but you're not probably going to be able to recommend too many films to somebody that doesn't like, language in their movies anyways. So it's not too graphic. So you can be able to recommend this to somebody that is a light horror, even though it's rated R, it's not too violent. So love it. Great movie. I guess that concludes this episode of the movie. That gives us an average score of 4 out of 5 possible points, which is our first film we've ranked. So I guess it's the only one we have a ranking of right now. So it's number 1, and it's both the first and the last film on our ranking score. So next week we'll be continuing our horror themed month with Fear Street Part 1, 1994. So if you would like to watch that and continue the discussion, I will be giving you details on how you can do that. Jeff, do you have anything else before you want to hop out of here?
So, as Parker mentioned, Fear Street Part 1 next week. If you're a huge fan of Stranger Things or Robin's character, Maya Hawke, she's in this movie. I don't know if she's like the star or if she just makes an appearance, but of course, Parker and I are huge fans of her. So I'm anxious to see her role in that movie. And
yeah, I've actually never watched these, so I'm excited.
yeah, this is one of those where I don't know if you're like me. I love going into a movie not knowing very much about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I like Black Phone. I didn't know a whole lot about it. And
Same.
for me, usually some of my best movie experiences is when I kind of go in blind, not knowing a lot about the movies. I don't even know what Fear Street is about or anything about it. Like, I just happen to notice that there's a couple of them that kind of feature some of the Stranger Things cast. So it just kind of caught my attention.
Yeah, I do know that Fear Street was originally a book series from Goosebumps author R.L. Stine, but I don't actually know if they're actually based on any of the books or if they're just using the name only. I have no idea.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how different the movies are, as far as, like this one wasn't super scary, but still great.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see if some of the other ones are more on the scary side, or there's so many different types of horror movies that you can get into. So I'm thinking, based on the list we got, we may find 5 completely different takes on the horror genre.
Yeah, I think we do. I think we kind of have a little bit of all of the elements covered. So I'm excited about this month, and yeah, love it, man. Thanks to my co-host Jeff, and thank you so much for listening. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. 5 stars and a review really do help these dudes out on the charts. Special thanks this week to Devin and Natalie for this week's film suggestion. if you would like to suggest a film or you have a thought or idea about what we're watching, please email us at streamingwith2dudes@gmail.com or request to join our Streaming with Two Dudes Facebook group. Links to our Patreon and our socials are in the show notes. Thanks again, and remember, don't take rides from strangers.